Hey everybody, welcome to Apocalypse Rising. Thanks for tuning in. Decided to make a video on Sunday. Today's already started off pretty crazy. I didn't realize we were supposed to turn our clocks back.
Smoke weed every day. Smoke weed every day.
And my phone is set on manual because whenever I try to set it on automatic, it puts me in a different time zone that's wrong. And so I made breakfast, I sat down and I was going to watch TV. Sunday's pretty much the only day I ever watch normal TV, so because I watch football. And the news was on and I was like, I don't watch the news. And they started talking about, oh, turning back your clocks and what time it really was. And I was like, oh, shoot, I didn't know we were supposed to turn back the clocks. I'm pretty oblivious when it comes to that stuff. I don't really care. And a lot of people like complain about it. They're like, oh, I hate it that we have to turn the clocks and it messes up my sleep schedule and all this weird stuff. And for me, I don't really, it doesn't affect me like that. But on days like today, I get a free hour. That's how I look at it because I didn't know. And so I just turned all my clocks back an hour and sweet. Free hour. And I'm not a big fan of turning it forward because you lose an hour, but I mean, it's not that big of a deal. But it was interesting because usually I would not have been sitting in front of my TV that early. And I turned the channel on to this guy, Joel Osteen, I think is his name. And I've seen him a few times and usually I can only handle him for about 5 minutes. And then I just change the channel for whatever reason. This time I watched him all the way through till the end. And it was super interesting because I had a different perspective on what he was saying, mainly because of a class I'm taking for my master's program. It's one of the last classes I have to take, and it meant multiple semesters where they weren't offering it. So I started freaking out a little like, oh, am I going to be able to get into this class? I needed to graduate. It's required. And luckily, my last semester, they offered it, and I'm in it now. And it's real interesting. It's positive psychology in organizations. And I never really took a whole lot of psychology in my undergrad. I took like intro to psychology, and it was not great. I didn't really like it. I got a B, and I think I just moved on. I never really thought about it. I look at psychology a little bit differently. I think to me, psychology is just a mix of a lot of stuff. It's basically how we create our realities, and we do that based off of our environment and what influences like input versus output. That's my basic understanding of psychology. And so more so it would be about, you know, how you communicate with others and how others communicate with you, the sociology of things, even down to the scientific environment, like cold and hot and pollution and all that stuff, you know, inputs into you. And then your psyche creates a reality based on those things. And that's your interpretation and how you live your life. So I don't know all the science stuff and all the tests and theories and whatnot, but this class actually opened my eyes up to a different side of psychology that I don't think I even knew existed. And that was probably why I wasn't interested into going further into what psychology is, but it had to do a lot with the history of psychology. At the beginning of the class, we started reading a textbook, and I can't remember the guy's name. Maybe it's like Spelgman or something like that. And he's supposed to be highly rated amongst the psychology community. And he started off with talking about positive psychology and philosophy, and that it's basically set on the framework of Aristotle and his idea that everybody is capable of reaching greatness, and it's all about being happy and having virtue. And that's how you are a positive influence on the world, and that's going to make you the happiest, most successful person you could be. And that's the philosophy that positive psychology builds off. And what they do is they talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And this author even tied extrinsic motivations into like climate change and greed and just basically selfishness, because whenever you make decisions off of extrinsic motivation, it's selfish, it's ego, it's only for yourself. And then you've got this intrinsic side of positive psychology where if you're motivated intrinsically, then you're doing things that are going to help others and further society and community instead of yourself. And that's what leads you to happiness. So it almost kind of paves these two roads that if you're intrinsically motivated and everybody's that way, that it will lead to utopia. By the same token, if you're extrinsically motivated and you just continue to set your goals based on that, it leads to dystopia. So you've got those two dichotomies there, and really that's simplified because obviously not everyone's going to be one or the other. And it's interesting because when I'm watching Joel talk about God and all this stuff, I figure, okay, well, this also ties into religion. In my opinion, philosophy, history, science, positive psychology, clearly it's all really based off of religion. That was kind of the first thing we did as human beings. You can go back and see things on the caves and whatnot. There's always been something there that we thought was supernatural, or if it was nature or death, there was always something else that humans recognized existed. And it basically is religion, and is then morphed into philosophy, and that morphed into science. And so now we see science's version of religion, really, in my opinion, is positive psychology, because it talks about, well, do good onto others, and then good things will happen to you. And this peace and this utopia that comes from making the moral decisions, in this case, intrinsic motivations, will lead to prosperity. Whereas if we're greedy and we're selfish and we're egotistical, then that leads to our demise or dystopia. And seeing someone like Joel go up there and talk about, you can reign, you can be the king, things may seem down now, but God's on your side. One thing he said was, you and God are the majority. So basically, when you think about positive psychology or religion, that whole thing about, well, one person can't change the world always comes up. And if you try to rationalize that with logic, you say, yeah, of course not. I mean, if you retrograde it back to the first person that thought about it, if it ever comes to fruition, you could say, look, that was one person changing the world. You could hypothetically say that that's what happens. But when it comes to a majority versus a minority, the majority is going to win. And the majority doesn't have to be in numbers. It can be in, possession of power or wealth. As long as you're the majority, you get to make the rules. So yeah, one person can try to do it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go all the way through unless it becomes the majority. And so what Joel was saying is that, like, you can defeat that attitude by saying, well, when you're with God, you are the majority, so you can make those things happen. And so it kind of it stokes that motivation for utopia and to the feeling that it exists. And so positive psychology kind of does the same thing. And I think that's why when I was watching him this morning, I recognize something a little bit different. If you just remove all the God stuff from it, even his storytelling ability is excellent. It really paints a vivid picture of what he's talking about. And he's basically just talking about staying positive. Even in the worst of times, stay positive. It's going to be okay. There's, you have to just face reality. And part of that is that you may perish. They even talk about that in positive psychology, that people that tend to dwell over death are more afraid to die, and they're more nervous people. But if you just accept death as something that occurs and it's going to happen to you, then it's like a load off, and you can try to be more positive about stuff and not be afraid to make a mistake that you're going to die or something to that extreme. So religion talks about that. Positive psychology talks about that. I think it's interesting that those things are still so connected. And now here I am in my master's program learning about how I can make a better workplace environment through positive psychology. And if you even tried to say something about God, oh, you know, you can't say that word anymore because it's offensive.
Daniel?
Instead of it just being one and the same. That, like I said, we've developed this since the dawn of time. And we just continue to have it as part of our collective consciousness, and it's just shifting into names. And then we have this big issue where we put names against other names and say, oh, it's not that, it's this. And then, oh, it's not that. And then you fight over it instead of it all just being the same thing. It's one message, and it just takes on different faces. And in this case, it's about, you know, not being greedy, not being sinful, not doing those kinds of things that we all do, but to the extreme where it's actually fostered, not only fostered, but encouraged. Breakfast. That's when it starts to become a problem, because that's the majority. Whereas the minority of people are saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should do these other things. And it's harder. And so there's less people. So it's the minority. And with positive psychology, is that going to change the world? Or are you just going to have a handful of people that believe in positive psychology and a handful of people that say, oh, that's hogwash? I know that, especially when I first started taking this class, I was in the camp of that this is hogwash. Just like someone who would watch Joel Osteen and say, oh, he's just talking about God and religion, this is hogwash. I even said one time in class, I said, well, there's always those things that are great in theory, but in practice, they don't work. And that's kind of what positive psychology feels like, because it's like, oh, here's this cure-all to make the world a better place. All you have to do is be nice to everyone else and think about other people. Well, that sounds like religion to me. And it doesn't even sound like one specific religion. It sounds like all of them. You know, if you want to reach enlightenment, or if you don't want to face karma, or you know, you want to go to heaven, whatever, you do these specific steps that are good for other people and humanity as a whole. If you're a Native American, you don't go slaughtering all the animals and stuff, because then you won't have anything to eat, because you're taking advantage of Mother Nature. You know what I mean? Like it's in everything. And so now here it is in positive psychology. And I found that interesting. And I'm wondering, you know, is this another facet that gets us closer to that? I personally think that it's not something that's feasible. It's just one of those things that we pine for, but it's going to be very difficult to achieve. And so the argument is, well, the closer we can get to that, the better off we'll be, which I think is valid. Unfortunately, what it looks like at the moment is that the majority of power and influence is taking us down the other path of extrinsic motivation, of dystopia, of hell. Of coming back as a cockroach, as not reaching enlightenment, as destroying the planet, and then we don't have anything to eat and we die.
He needs some milk.
I think that the majority of what we're doing is leading us down that path. So I think that's why I make these videos, because for me, it's really easy to just tie in actual things that are going on in the world and putting it to these theories and these philosophies about what we need to do to be better prepared as a civilization for what's to come. And we get to choose that. But unfortunately, the choices we're making are leading us in the wrong direction. And are we going to be able to start making the right decisions and kind of riding the ship, if you will? And it really does feel like we're in like a paradigm shift right now, where we could go either way. And it's going to be a struggle, because we're blazing down the path that we're on now. We're going fast. So to reverse that and kind of, you know, we're going to be skidding out and you know, and doing donuts and flipping around and oversteering and understeering until we get back on track and start going in the other direction, or we're just going to keep on barreling down that road until we just hit a brick wall at the end. No airbags, no brakes, just brick wall, boom.
Allah Akbar!
You know, that's where we're headed. So if we can't change that, we're doomed. And that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. And I think that right now we've got an election coming up, and I'll just talk a little about this since it's coming up. And I think it's going to be Tuesday. Go out there and vote. Do whatever you think you need to do in your mind to make the world a better place here. And let's see what happens, because my personal opinion is it doesn't really matter either way. One way, you're probably going to have economic collapse, which is bad. The other way, you're just going to prolong economic collapse while you're just destroying the planet. So you've got those two options, and I'm pretty sure you can put two and two together. I'll let your interpretation of what I said guide who you vote for.
Got him!
But my opinion is those are the two tracks, and neither one of those are great, and they're going to get bumpy. For me, obviously, if you watch my videos, you know the path where we just keep destroying the planet, that's the one that leads to dystopia. The other way is almost like we're going to have to make some really big sacrifices to get back on to the right path. It's going to suck. It's not just going to turn overnight where we're like, oh, we made the right decisions. Woo, that was close. You know, it's going to suck. And it might not even feel like we're making the right choices. And it all just boils down to the decisions that we make here in the next 3 to 6 months. And there's just so many other influences and variables that luck plays a role. It plays a huge role. So keep your fingers crossed. And I guess since it's Sunday and I watch Joel Osteen and I just feel positive about things, you know, he said it's your time to reign. You know, we're all, what do you say, children of the King. So we all are able to achieve our greatness, our own personal greatness, whatever that may be, if we want to, and we try and we believe enough in our own greatness that we can become great, and collectively that would make the world a better place. And everybody has the capability of doing that. I think we should all try, if we're not, and recognize when people are, because it seems like what we do recognize, what we thumbs up, what we heart, it's for the majority very superficial. And if that doesn't change, I think it's just another thing we can add to the list of our impending doom as a species. And on that positive note, I'll let you go. Have a good week. And hopefully I'll make some more videos this week. Keep the ball rolling.